During the early to mid 1800s, museums across England and Europe eagerly sought exotic specimens to showcase in their exhibitions. A young man could earn a respectable income by providing English museums with rare and highly sought after plant and animal specimens. These voyages were known as collecting trips. These collecting trips were quite popular among young Englishmen, particularly those with scientific interests. The expeditions were driven by the growing demand for exotic specimens to display in museums, but also for private collections. Alfred Russel Wallace is officially the co discoverer of human evolution. Wallace was born in a small town on the Welsh border in 1823. He experienced a largely uneventful middle class English upbringing. In his later teenage years, for a period of 6 years, Wallace apprenticed with his older brother as a geographic surveyor in the English and Welsh countryside. In his spare time, Alfred Wallace indulged his passion for botany, collecting and naming various plant species. Wallace was a voracious reader. He would spend hours at the local library during downtimes in the surveying business. Britannica. Wallace was inspired by naturalists like Carl Linnaeus, Robert Chambers, and Alexander von Humboldt, who were known for their extensive travels and discoveries. He also read two other books that would later have a profound impact on his development of the theory of evolution: Principle of Population by Thomas Malthus and Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell. One book that particularly captivated Wallace was a popular selection of the time, authored by a fellow young naturalist, Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle. Inspired by Darwin's tales of world travel, Wallace and his friend Henry Bates discussed setting out on their own voyage. According to a paper published in 2014, one of the main goals which drove Bates and his companion Alfred Russel Wallace to plan an expedition to Brazil was to search for a solution to the great problem of the origin of species. In 1848, Bates and Wallace embarked on their daring voyage to Brazil. The journey would not only shape their own destinies, but also ignite a revolution in evolutionary science, profoundly influencing Darwin and forever altering our understanding of life's diversity. Wallace and Bates in the Amazon jungles of Brazil. They arrived in the bustling port city of Belém in northeast Brazil. After spending some time on the coast, they moved inland to the Tocantins region. They used American author William Henry Edwards' wildly popular book of the era, Up the Amazon River, as their guide. They made their way to the Tocantins region, where they encountered various native tribes. Some of the native tribes proved friendly and even introduced them to the local flora and fauna. Their interactions with these tribes were crucial for their scientific studies and collections. Bates and Wallace faced immense challenges, including recurrent bouts of illness from tropical diseases, logistical difficulties, isolation, and financial strains. After 2 years of collecting specimens, Wallace decided to return to England. Bates's influence. Bates would remain. He ended up staying in Brazil for 8 years. After his return, he wrote a series of books. His most acclaimed work was The Naturalist Up the River. PBS 2017. When he later published his findings, The Naturalist on the River Amazon, Darwin called it, quote, the best book of natural history travels ever published in England, end quote. Sandra Knapp, Linnaean Society. Bates is one of those Victorian naturalists whose star shines brightly, but whose truly profound contributions to the explanation of just how evolution by natural selection works are often overlooked. Henry Bates greatly influenced Charles Darwin by providing crucial specimens from the Amazon supporting Darwin's theory of natural selection. Note aside, there is circumstantial evidence that Bates may have been the first one to come up with the phrase, quote unquote, origin of species. Wallace's return to England. Wallace had taken ill again. He boarded a ship to return to England, carrying precious specimens he had collected over the past 4 years. "26 days into the journey back to England, a horrible tragedy struck. Wallace's ship, the Helen, caught on fire and sunk. Wallace endured 10 harrowing days adrift in a lifeboat. He was finally rescued by a passing ship. Unfortunately, all his meticulously gathered collections were lost to sea. Back home in England, Wallace, near penniless, wrote some articles about his adventures. Wallace's sister Fanny played a crucial role in bolstering his resilience and determination. Her support helped him overcome setbacks and inspired him to persist in his scientific endeavors. According to the BBC, The Forgotten Voyage 2013, Wallace during this time even met Sir Charles Darwin briefly by chance on a visit to the London Natural History Museum. National Geographic. In 1854, Wallace embarked on his next major expedition to the Malay Archipelago, where he would spend 8 years collecting specimens and further developing his evolutionary theories. Wallace in the Dutch East Indies. Wallace commenced his expedition in Singapore, where he gathered supplies and planned his route. Wallace's time in Singapore was marked by the violent Hokkien Teochew Cantonese riots, which resulted in over 500 deaths and significant destruction in the city. Beginning in 1855, Wallace spent nearly a decade on a collecting trip, island hopping throughout the Malay Archipelago. He traveled on foot, horseback, and steamboats. At times he made the trek with a companion, other times by himself. Unlike his previous voyage, Wallace's specimens made their way back to England unharmed. He was able to afford his upkeep and further travels throughout the East Indies. While traveling the archipelago, Wallace had been reading and rereading volumes from Charles Lyell, Principles of Geology, and Thomas Malthus, Principle of Population. Lyell's Principles of Geology provided Wallace with the concept of deep geological time, allowing him to understand that evolutionary changes could occur gradually over millions of years. The Wallace Line. The Makassar Strait contains a deep sea trench that separates Sulawesi from Borneo with a depth of approximately 2,500 meters. Wallace, Malay Archipelago, 1864. There is evidence in the geological structure of Java and Borneo to show that some parts of these islands are of recent formation. Continuing, the gulf between the Asiatic and Australian regions was formerly much greater than it is now. This is most strikingly confirmed by the almost total diversity between the animals of the two halves of the archipelago. Continuing, in the Western Islands, all the chief forms of animal life of the Asiatic continent are found, while in the eastern half we have chiefly those characteristic of Australia. Recognizing the distinct species on either side of the deep water trench was crucial for Wallace in developing his theory of speciation. NBC News, Forgotten Evolutionists, 2009. He noticed that bird species were different on each island and concluded that a deep water trench created a boundary that separated the animal species of Southeast Asia and Australasia. Wallace, a line across the archipelago, marks the division between two great zoological regions of the globe. Wallace's friend Thomas Huxley would later call this geographic phenomenon the Wallace line. Malthus's impact on Wallace's evolutionary theory. In addition to Lyell's tome, Wallace kept a copy of Sir Thomas Malthus's Principles of Population with him while traveling through the archipelago. Britannica. Malthusianism exerted an important influence upon the ideas of evolutionary biologists led by Charles Darwin. Evolution.berkeley.edu. When Darwin and Wallace read Malthus, it occurred to both of them that animals and plants should also be experiencing the same population pressure. Thomas Malthus, Essay on Population, 1798. Quote, on the whole, the best adapted live. End quote. Ternate, the spark of evolutionary insight. 'Twas on the island of Ternate, off the western coast of New Guinea, where Wallace eventually established his home base. BBC, The Island That Forever Changed Science, 2022. On a tiny volcanic Indonesian island, a little-known naturalist formulated a theory that would shape the world of science. Wallace often suffered from malaria. During one severe episode, he became delirious, drifting in and out of consciousness. Smithsonian. It was during fits of malaria that Wallace started to come up with the idea of natural selection. BBC. Wallace experienced a severe bout of malaria, which left him bedridden for several days. During this time, he endured intense cold sweats and hot fits, forcing him to lie down for hours at a time. Wallace awoke from his feverish dream and had a groundbreaking revelation. He quickly rushed to his table and began writing furiously. By his own account, he scarcely left that table for 4 days straight. The fittest will survive. BBC Wallace, quote, vaguely thinking over this enormous and constant destruction which this implied, it occurred to me to ask the question, why do some die and some live? End quote. He later wrote. Continuing, quote, and the answer was clearly that, on the whole, the best fitted live. End quote. Wallace was echoing Malthus almost verbatim from his 1798 essay on population. On the whole, the best adapted live. Berkeley.edu. Darwin and Wallace both realized that if an animal has some trait that helps it to withstand the elements or to breed more successfully, it may leave more offspring behind than others. Continuing, on average, the trait will become more common in the following generation and the generation after that. Wallace. Every species has come into existence coincident both in space and time with a pre-existing, closely allied species. Species on one side of the Wallace line would be genealogically linked to only those species in their spatial region. It was Wallace's butterfly collections, along with his observation of Malay Archipelago bird populations, that helped him recognize the importance of speciation. Wallace. Species are merely those strongly marked races or local forms which, when in contact, do not intermix, and when inhabiting distinct areas, are generally believed to have had a separate origin. The race to publish. Smithsonian. He sent his manuscript to Darwin, who puts together a set of notes to present it alongside of Wallace's. On July 1st, 1858, at the monthly gathering of the Linnaeus Society, Lyell and Huxley presented both Darwin's Origin of Species manuscript and Wallace's paper on the tendency of species to form varieties. Wallace accepted second place in the discovery of natural selection. He celebrated Darwin's book and largely faded into obscurity. National Geographic. Though Wallace's contributions to the study of evolution were considerable, they are often forgotten. And so, despite the shadows of obscurity that often veil his legacy, Alfred Russel Wallace remains an indelible co-discoverer of the profound theory of evolution by natural selection. Coming soon, Wallace and speciation. Does it apply to humans? Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.